Blue Velvet from 1986. This is a film directed and written by David Lynch, starring Colin McLaughlin, Dennis Hopper, Laura Dern, and Isabella Rossellini. The IMDb plot summary: the discovery of a severed human ear found in the fields leads a young man on an investigation related to a beautiful, mysterious nightclub singer and a group of psychopathic criminals who have kidnapped her child. So this movie to me is kind of came along. I first saw this in either late high school or really early college. Came along in a time in my life when I started sort of realizing that a lot of what the kind of perfect view of like American suburbia is layered. It's not just everything's fine. This film really showed me like, oh yeah, like helped me during this time. I grew up in the suburbs. I know this is a movie podcast, but I was influenced probably just as much with television. And growing up, mainly I watched old television from the 50s and 60s. And all of those shows were built around mother, father, 2.5 kids, white picket fence. Everything's fine, little hijinks if someone kind of, gets trips at school or whatever. Like that's the worst thing that could happen. And everything else is perfect. And that was mainly all the media I was consuming growing up. And living in the suburbs too, you do kind of feel a little bit isolated, like, oh, everything's fine. Suburbs are really nice. America's really nice. This sort of idyllic post-World War II kind of Norman Rockwell society is actually what it's really like. And, as you grow up, you realize that's not really the case. And not only just about what the cost is, but they kind of plaster over a lot of the dark side of that. And it's not as perfect as it may seem. And I think this film, again, came along right as I was starting to realize that. And that is really what the through line and theme of this film is. And before I get more into it, I'm just curious if you'd seen this film before, maybe in general too, like what I was kind of saying, if you had that in mind too, when you think about America, like the white picket fence situation.
Yeah, I had not watched this movie, and thanks to you, my education with David Lynch continues through this podcast. So that was fun. The movie in itself, and I know we'll get deeper into it. Like it definitely, that is a through line. There's no question. I still wrestle with sort of the dream state, David Lynchian movie making. Elephant Man really worked for me because that's sort of rooted in reality. This sort of dream state thing, I have a hard time getting on board with the stakes and the performances because they're just so
soapy.
Kind of yeah, exactly.
They're very soapy. Yeah,
they're very soapy, and I know that's the point. Like it's supposed to be the sort of fever dream sort of thing, but it feels unreal to me, and that's why I can't fully get into it. That said, the mastery of the movie and how it's put together and how it's shot, its technical elements, amazing. There's no question. Like, that this is like a master at play. But maybe I need to watch this one and Mulholland Drive, which I actually prefer over this
Me
one.
too. Mulholland Drive is his masterpiece in my opinion.
Many times more. If I watch them, I'll probably fully get it, which maybe also is the point that it's sort of, you're not supposed to fully embrace this, I think, because it is kind of this fever dream thing. But that said, yeah, in terms of sort of the white picket fences thing, I mean, growing up, I obviously didn't know much about that. And, we watched Who's the Boss or kind of these kid-oriented sort of
more contemporary
TV shows, more contemporary, Full House or what have you. Like, that is my association. But I don't know, it's different, right? Because you grew up here and you lived in probably a suburban sort of world. I always took it as this is one side of the country. I never took it as this is all there is. It can't be.
Right.
I also sort of felt that I knew in my instincts that America is also very good at marketing, in general.
Of course. Yes.
And there's good in that, but there's also kind of not so good in that, which automatically made me watch these shows with a certain degree of like suspicion that it's probably marketing. It's not all real. So I never fully bought it, but I also enjoyed it. And I also felt like, again, not every day has to be this way. It's like when I moved here to California, for the first 3 months, I would be kind of annoyed when people were cheery and happy in grocery stores and, hey, how's it going? And then I sort of was like, actually, isn't that better?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
It is better than being, sulky and mad. So it's also kind of what you make of it.
Sure.
As always, it's not black and white.
Right. Yeah, I think the dreamlike point you mentioned is definitely a part of Lynch's aesthetic for sure.
Yeah.
I think in this movie, it works really well, especially in the opening. I mean, honestly, like the opening minute and a half to 2 minutes of this movie is thesis of the entire film, where it does start with these very soft cameras going over those white picket fences. There's like firemen and American flags and little kids walking to school.
On the nose music.
A very on the nose music from like the 50s. And then there's just this incredible shot where he pans down and then goes underground underneath the perfectly green grass. And they're just like all these disgusting insects. And they're all just like eating each other. And this, you hear all these horrible, like, sounds of these insects and stuff, showing literally what the entire movie's about to unfold in front of you, that there is this veneer where everything looks fine, but you sort of peel it back a little bit and it's not perfect. It is all marketing. And I think that is a lot of what these other, not to bring those TV shows back up again that I was watching as a kid, Donna Reed Show and Dick Van Dyke and Lassie and all those shows where it was, marketing, because they were trying to sell this new post-World War II, American lifestyle to everyone. And, when you're a kid, you sort of buy that. And then this came along at the right time for me to sort of say, well, wait a second. And, when the character, Kyle MacLachlan's character, kind of goes through this journey, finds that ear, like we mentioned in the plot summary, which I sort of take to be a sort of symbol of gossip and things that can happen in these small towns too, which is a big negative thing. Like these evil gossip is like representative of the ear. And then he slowly like uncovers this horrible plot that's going on with Dennis Hopper's character, who's just one of the most amazing like villain performances, and so bizarre and weird. And you do get that sense that this is a world that you're really not supposed to see, much like, again, this is hidden right underneath this perfect, what looks to be a perfect life. There's that great sequence too when he's in the closet, Colin MacLachlan's character peering out into this apartment of this woman that he's been tracking, Isabella Rossellini, and then sees this whole scene with Dennis Hopper and Rossellini play out. And you as an audience member also feel like kind of gross, like you're this voyeur in this closet watching something you probably shouldn't be seeing. And it really puts you in that shoes too, where you're feeling kind of uncomfortable, much like you would if you're trying to look at the secrets that all these perfect looking houses and perfect looking society has, all these secrets beneath it, which is what I think this movie does so well. The bugs, I think, can represent a lot of different things. There's definitely a theme of the bugs in this film, racism, sexism, all these different things that also existed too during the 50s as well. And I think what this movie came out in the mid 80s, which was definitely a time where there was a lot of 50s nostalgia and throwback to the 1950s. And it all was a positive look back on that. And this movie's not set in the 50s, though people dress kind of like it. And the cars sometimes are kind of like it. And again, I think Lynch is trying to make a comment on this perfect vision of America that was marketed in the 50s through the 80s, where there's still some 80s stuff in there, but not really, because people are still trying to hold on to this 50s notion of America, which existed for a certain extent, but there was also a lot of bad parts about that too, which I think is sometimes forgotten in the marketing. Like, yeah, some people live like that, and I'm not saying I don't want to have a nice life, but again, who was getting that, and at what cost was that at? And maybe it wasn't even as perfect, which is actually funny. This is the first time I'd seen this film since the Douglas Sirk film we watched for the fall episode, and I was seeing a lot of comparisons. So I know Sirk's influence on Lynch, and I could see a lot of comparisons to what Sirk was doing in that time. Like he was doing it in the 50s, where showing, everything looks great, it's very melodramatic, very soapy, amazing colors, but they were dealing with some really serious stuff. And I think Lynch just takes that to more of an extreme, obviously, but maybe it's easier because there's been, decades since that time than what Sirk was doing. But I was really starting to also notice the similarities in, acting styles. Even like the Sirk stuff is very soapy and melodramatic. And I think that's what Lynch was going for with his characters in this film too. Especially there's this one scene where Laura Dern first comes, I think it's her first appearance, where she sort of steps out of the darkness. And there's a big swell of music and she sort of appears, and it's sort of like she's I feel like you're watching a soap opera. But I think that again ties back to what Lynch is trying to say here.
Yeah, she's great. I think the other thing also is that Isabella Rossellini, like it's a very hit or miss sort of thing. You like that or you don't.
Her performance or her as an actress?
Yeah.
Her
as
performance.
An actress.
Oh, okay.
And performance. It's never worked for me. It's like a caricature sort of thing, no matter where she is. So maybe that, but that's interesting. I didn't think about the 50s movies, but you make a brilliant point with that, which makes me wonder, has this always been that people who lived in that time probably felt all of it, right? The marketing and the reality and the struggles and the stuff in the middle. But then over time, what lives is the marketing.
Right.
And what was portrayed, because those dark inner feelings are not often portrayed because they don't sell, because people want something aspirational. in that time when they're living. But then later on, all you get is the marketing. So then you can critique and sort of almost feel like, oh, people were foolish and they thought that it was all great. But maybe people were never foolish. Maybe they always knew that this is not real. Totally. I know how hard it is to bring up my 2 kids and stay in the same job for 40 years, what have you. So it'll be interesting 30 years from now when people make movies about this time that we are living in today. What would that look like?
That's true. And, I can't say because I didn't live during the 50s. I think maybe they were trying to believe potentially in that the we'll just call it marketing.
Believing in other things now that are being
right. Totally. I don't think there's that much of a belief in that this exists anymore nowadays, which is maybe just a comment on our generation or society or what have you. But I think the marketing is really key. And I think that is, again, kind of touching on what America has been from the beginning in a way. I mean, if you're a country that is based around immigration, you need to sell a good, hey, come here because of X, Y, and Z. So then people came and they're still coming today. But is that marketing real? No. Maybe even know when you're, going over, you decide to make the journey, it's not going to be exactly what they're selling you, but maybe there is some components of that. And I think you hit on something interesting too, that I think that also in terms of the 50s and what they might've believed in at the time, I think also just society in America, you're marketing yourself too. Exactly. And you don't necessarily want to talk about the hard things and the troubles that you're going through and the struggles, because you're trying to market a version of yourself that is closer to what the beginning of the Blue Velvet is. Oh, everything's fine. Oh, look, it's great. Everything's fine. Because that's what everyone's telling themselves and telling other people, and kind of avoiding a lot of the things that I think are healthy to talk about. And I just don't think in the US, at least, that is valued as much as, what is your marketing pitch? Like, how are you selling yourself and portraying yourself versus how you're actually doing? And I think that was always probably the case. And, maybe that's the case in other countries too, but I definitely feel that in the US for sure, that it's a lot about what your image is matters a lot more than actually how you're feeling and how you're doing.
Yeah. It's also very human, right? Like, I grew up in a place where there were rows and rows of slums, but these people always had a smile on their faces. I don't know how they were feeding their 10 kids, but they were sort of making ends meet. So I think it's also what makes us survive as a species. I think you have to market to yourself that it's okay and that you'll figure it out. True. Otherwise, all these countries with like a billions plus population and so much poverty, how are they making one day after the other? You couldn't.
That's definitely true. The last thing I'll say about the film, and it kind of touches on something you were just mentioning too about what people would think today. But in the 90s, I always knew about this as like some sort of illicit kind of dangerous film. That was sort of the perception of it. Definitely when it came out, it was really controversial and people were, hating on it and saying, oh, this is too salacious. You can't put this on the screen. And you watch this now and it's not controversial at all. I feel like it's very much just, okay, yeah, we've seen this a million times since. It's not anything new or normal. So maybe there is just a sliding scale things of just how people relate to this or how much they're believing in this marketing as time goes on. I think less and less that sort of 50s idea of what the idyllic situation is in America is, fading away. Not that, again, it probably ever existed to the way that it was marketed, but I think even the marketing is not really working anymore, because this isn't shocking. You watch this movie, yeah, of course.
The new marketing is that all that was bad.
That's true.
All that didn't work. So that is the new marketing that we have now chosen to believe in, I think.
Well, yeah, that's another debate we can have. I would argue that it didn't work.
No, it didn't work. I agree with that. But I'm saying that now that's the marketing that, that was just, so that's the thing. We as people, we always have to believe in some marketing. Is what I think,
Right.
And this is the current marketing we believe in, even though I agree it's true. But it's never the entire truth is what I'm trying to say.
Sure. Of course. Yeah. It's definitely, again, the world is black and gray. There's things that are bad, and then there's everything else that is there's layers to it,
I'll just pick gray.
Okay. I believe there is bad things.
Yeah. Okay. You're right.
There are bad things that are bad there's no gray to them, but most of the things are gray.
Most things are gray.
There's got some things in black and it's
bad.
Just, exactly.
Definitely.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.